The Fan Letter Bride by Adela Rogers St. John's. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Have you ever been in a laboratory and seen the brilliant fluids, red and green and purple and yellow, mingled in a glass test tube? Mixed by an expert hand, even the most deadly of them produce marvelous things, things beyond belief. But now and then the wrong colors flow together, and the results are tragic or amazing, very different from the planned formula. Any life chemist who knew Amory Allen and Peter Gray could have prophesied a little of what might happen if their lives touched vitally, but no one could have foreseen how it would reach out and draw Ann Bent, of Georgia, into the white-hot laboratory of Hollywood, to experiment with the elemental forces of life and love and happiness. There is no question that "on location" has come to be a phrase of varied significance in Hollywood. It has been used perchance as an alibi for erring husbands, merely the motion picture synonym for business trips and lodge meetings. It has served Cupid more successfully than any other single device. Marooned in the dullness of desert camps, snowed within the high walls of the Sierras, or lost amid the giant redwoods of the Yosemite, the world fades quickly, too quickly. Events move. The thing that happened to Amory Allen and Peter Gray would probably have happened anyway. But the location trip to Wildwood brought it to a swifter and more poignant crisis than it might otherwise have known. Circumstances had merely provided a shortcut. It was very cold at Wildwood in November. The wind tore peaceful snow from its graves on the giant trees and swirled it against the windows of the log cabin. That big, rambling pleasure resort lay half buried in stark whiteness, forlorn as a deserted summer girl. Amory Allen woke to hear the whimpering of the wind and the scratching of branches against her window. She snuggled down under the scanty blankets and pulled her sable coat more tightly around her, but the cold had penetrated her slim, exquisite body, and she shivered again and again. Physical discomfort was the one thing that drove her utterly wild. What a fool she had been to consent to do this outdoor stuff in winter! What a complete idiot to let them persuade her to come without her maid! Her nerves protested violently against the invisible fingers that seemed trying to tear away the walls of the ugly, bare bedroom. "I can't stand this," said Amory with a gulp, and jumped out of bed. In the pitch darkness, there was no one to see that leap. It had been, actually, Amory's leap to fame. Many times, in many places, audiences great and small had thrilled to see Amory spring from strange satin couches and stand before them in bewildering negligéed loveliness. Now she put her feet into silly silken mules, wrapped her furs around her, and slipped into the hall. It was very dark, but she hoped that a glimmer of fire might remain in the huge fireplace of the main hall to warm and lighten her. As she passed the last door, the dimples flickered into her white face, and she knocked, then fled down the stairs. Peter Gray had not been sleeping, which was a very unusual proceeding for Peter. The wind and the snow and the cold had no effect upon Peter. He liked them. He was used to battling about on hunting trips and taking care of himself. He had learned all about discomfort in the trenches, and it no longer had power to annoy him. a big, strong, capable, self-confident young chap. The new type of leading man, suggesting an engineer, a mining expert, a bridge builder, almost anything rather than an actor. For the past hour he had resolutely counted sheep. It was typical of Peter that he should pit that ancient superstition against the turmoil that rode him, the clamor of heart and senses that had been stirring him ever since the company came into the wilderness to make snow stuff. But between him and the fence over which said sheep should have jumped, came continually the picture of a little pointed face, of eyes that were the color of a dark topaz. The very first time Peter saw her, at the studio a day or two after he had been sent out by the New York office to play opposite her, he had a dizzy, heart-pounding, breathless second, such as follows the first drag at an opium pipe. 9 out of 10 men who saw Amory Allen had that same sensation. One of the shrewdest producers in the business paid her $1,000 a week, chiefly on account of it. Still, no one had been able to determine exactly why slim, fragile Amory, with her pure brow and her delicate sweetness, should stir the elemental forces of life to such strange issues. There was no voluptuousness, no siren call, no startling lure of the flesh-pots. Rather the lure of a honey-pot. Subtle she was, full of suggestions that stole on the senses like incense in a temple. Men gazed upon the masses of her bronzy curls and immediately dreamed them against a background of scented baby pillows. A famous critic had once compared Amory Allen to lavender and pink hyacinths in a Grecian vase. Peter's first, throbbing response to her had been followed by a steady glow of sensation, so that, lying awake on the hard, lumpy bed, he sought sleep in vain. The knock startled him. A ghost knock it was, yet somehow real. He wondered if his too wakeful brain had played him a trick. But Peter's brain was not apt to play him tricks. He was, or had been, a very well-balanced, sensible young man. In fact, an amazingly well-balanced young man for an actor. Well, he had heard a knock. Then he caught the sound of fairy footsteps on the stairs. He buttoned his sweater over his trousers, laced his sneakers with fingers that shook, answered that ghost knock, followed those fairy footsteps. There was the faintest glimmer of light in the great raftered hall. The corners were swathed in black, but about the rough stone fireplace hung a glimmer of rose and flame. And in the very heart of it, Amory, with her masses of curls about her shoulders, and her big topaz eyes very wide open, with her little soft hands dragging the luxuriant soft coat about her, and slim ankles pearly bare. "Oh, Peter," she said, "I'm so glad you've come. I'm so cold and frightened. I most froze in my bed, and I couldn't sleep. Something kept beating on my window, and I was afraid. Peter, can we build up the fire, and will you stay here with me, just a little while?" Peter did not answer her, because he could not. The wonder of her had him by the throat, enmeshed, smothered. His spirit, and it was a very proud and upright and manly young spirit, lay prostrate before the light of her eyes and the helpless appeal of her husky, sweet voice. Silently, while she kept near to him as though afraid of the shadows, Peter rebuilt the fire, coaxed it into a lovely hot blaze, drew the big chairs close to its warm, fragrant heart. The pine cones he had piled on top crackled and sputtered and gave out the most delicious fragrance. Amory sank into the big chair, taking deep, contented breaths. Her coat slipped open to frame a childish throat and shoulder. Peter remembered that they used to say you could see the red wine slip down her throat when Mary Stuart drank, and he wondered if it might not be the same with Amory, so transparent and fine she seemed. Her eyelids drooped childishly over the exaggerated, unbelievable eyes. "Peter," she said softly, drowsily, "do you know, you're very good to me. You take such good care of me out in the snow. You're so strong. I'm awfully glad that they brought you clear out from New York for this part. Now you're here, I can't imagine it could ever have been anyone else. Can you? You're awfully nice, Peter." Somewhere within him, Peter's soul on guard sounded a tiny note of warning. But adoration for this small, lovely woman thing swamped it, buried it almost unheard. Without knowing how he got there, he found himself beside her in the big chair, holding her close to him, feeling the most exquisite joy in her yielding lovableness. "Amory, I love you. I love you," he said over and over, without thinking or caring to think of any other words. He had forgotten the very meaning of artistry in love-making. Memory of any other love experiences had ceased to function. "My sweet, sweet little girl. I don't understand what's happened to me, Amory. This is love. That's all. I never dreamed it could be like this. You're so wonderful, so wonderful. Do you love me? You can't, but oh, do you?" "Oh, but I do love you, Peter," she cried softly. "I just adore you. I've been quite mad about you from the first moment I saw you." The ring of passionate sincerity in her voice matched his own. Peter heard a whole chorus of heavenly angels singing about his head. "You're the sweetest armful in the whole world," he said, bending his high, dark young head to hers. "Do you know, Amory, when I kiss you I hear a great, magnificent symphony orchestra playing wonderful music. I hear the throb and thrill of 1,000 violins in my head." Then he let her go and got up, to stand very tall and straight before her. His uncompromising young gray eyes looked down into her topaz ones. "Dear, I don't know just how to tell you this. I I'm not very different from most men. God knows I wish now I were. But I haven't been rotten. I've never asked anyone to marry me before, but if you had a father, there wouldn't be anything to tell him. I know I couldn't be good enough for you ever. But I love you so much. I feel I have a right to ask you to marry me. I've tried, my precious little goddess, to, what is it the poet says? To keep my sword and my honor clean, to lay them both down at my lady's feet." He blushed at himself, then, rather finely, he added, "And I'm laying them down at your feet, dear. Will you marry me?"
Of course I'll marry you, darling,"
she said, and even the recording angel could not credit her with a lie. As she spoke, she meant it with everything in her.
Of course, but not right away. Oh, darling, isn't love wonderful?"
I I just worship you, Amory, he said. The dawn crept whitely into the big room, a cold dawn, timid and reluctant to enter. Its chilled fingers touched Peter's dark hair and broke the spell of his rapt gaze at the little, sleeping face on his shoulder. The fire burned a soft, steady glow. With a sigh, Peter picked up the small, relaxed little figure. His muscles were stiff from the long hours he had held her warm and comfortable and protected, that she might sleep well. But he carried her easily upstairs to her room, and laid her on the bed. Before he went out, he knelt down and kissed one small, bare foot, from which the silken slipper had fallen. 2. Denty Kelly, besides being an excellent heavy, was something of a life chemist himself. He put the paper down and sat, his feet on top of the fine oak desk, looking out at the busy boulevard with reflective, bitter eyes. He blamed himself horribly, horribly, and yet what was there he could have done or said to Peter in these past 2 months? How could he have approached this thing without destroying his own deep friendship with Peter, and to no purpose? You could not tell any man in love with Amory much. Peter you could tell nothing. Dinty lit his pipe and puffed at it, but the very tobacco tasted bitter. Wasn't it enough that she had mangled his own dreams and ideals, and left him with this bitter taste in his heart? He didn't really matter much. Whatever he got might very well be back pay for some of his own doings. He admitted that. After all, he was a pretty bedraggled old sinner. Whatever Amory had smothered in him, she had first created. They were, in the last analysis, hers to murder if she liked. Besides, Dinty understood Amory Allen. He understood utterly the things about her that Peter could never understand, and his own hurt had balm of his knowledge. There wasn't an ounce of real badness, of coquetry, of intention to hurt in Amory. She was what she was. When she said a thing, she meant it. If 2 hours later she no longer meant it, she could see no sin in that. He understood, but Peter was a different matter. Peter wasn't Irish. He was American, with predominant strains of English and Dutch. Peter was young, too. He had not been born to the easy emotionalism of the actor. It was still a mystery how he had strayed from the path of righteousness. Righteousness, in this case, being selling bonds, working in a bank, or being associated with a conservative business firm. When Peter, after his graduation from college, had decided he wanted to be an actor and had gone into the movies, his mother had taken to her bed for a week. She took the thing, everything, very hard. It was her pride that most hurt. His father merely asked him coldly to change his name. He did. He would have had to anyway. Peter von Raysdahl would never have done it all. Many, many of the von Raysdahl bonds Peter had broken. He was, for instance, the most lovable, compassionate young egg in the world. Of that Dinty was convinced. He played a more than average game of golf. His courage was stupendous, and his egotism amazingly negative. He was given to, and delighted in, all-night discussions over a bit of bootleg whiskey and a number of tattered volumes which he owned, and which ranged from a collection of La Vie Parisienne made while he was in Paris during the war to pet copies of Kant, Spencer, and Darwin. But some of them he had not broken, chiefly a slow, cold pride, an intense regard for public opinion, whether right or wrong, and a sullen, strange vengefulness. It was those things that occupied Dinty as he sat looking at the paper, reading again and again the headline, looking more than once at the pictured face of Amory Allen, with its sweet brow and thin, amorous lips. He wished nervously that Peter would come. It was after 5. Peter was usually home. They shared a comfortable and rather distinguished apartment on Hollywood Boulevard. Around 5. He never stopped to take off his makeup at the studio, but came straight home to undress, shower, and lounge about in all stages of nudity, talking to Dinty meanwhile. Dinty Kelly closed the paper and shoved it under the big blotter on his desk. It only remained to pray that Peter would not see it before he came home. Dinty did not relish breaking the news of Amory's new engagement to Peter, but he knew Amory well enough to be sure she had funked it, and he preferred doing it himself to letting Peter learn it through printer's ink. Peter had seen the paper, however. More than that, he had seen Amory. Perhaps in all his life, Peter never entirely got over the anguish that came to him as he gazed at this woman he had worshipped, the eyes in whose depths he had drowned his beings, the lips on whose altar he had laid his soul, the slim, lovely body he had reverenced and protected even from himself, all there. Yet this was not his Amory now. It was worse than death, this moment when he gazed on all those dear, familiar things, and knew no way to reach them, to bring them back to him. He was very cold at first, this young Peter Grey, all 6 feet 2 of him, and the high boots and rough shirt of a miner he was playing with a revolver at his hip. Yes, he had seen the paper, and he did not believe it. Another press agent yarn. He stood pat, even while his mind tried coldly to convince him. So he went direct to Amory. It would have been better if he had not. She had gone home early, and he went up to the mansion, shining high above the boulevard as fast as his big roadster would take him. The paper stuck in his pocket. With her lived an aunt, a cold and silent woman who liked Peter. "He's the best of the lot," she told Amory. Peter had followed a Russian dancer whom Aunt Hetty particularly detested. "She's gone to bed," she said to Peter as she opened the door, and the gleam of pity in her eyes struck him as lightning strikes a tree. "She said she wouldn't see anybody. She's all tired out. But you can go up if you like. I'm not going to stop you." Peter went up, 3 stairs at a time. Half an hour later he came down, holding to the railing, and he went out like a blind man, or like a man mortally wounded who must reach some goal before the last enemy stops him. Aunt Hetty went upstairs, her lips pinched, her nostrils white. Amory Allen lay huddled on the bed, her shoulders twisting, her face quivering. "Well," said Aunt Hetty, "I told you." "What did he do?" Amory sobbed. "Oh, Auntie, he was terrible, brutal. He said awful things to me. I hate him." Said Aunt Hetty. "I dare say. What did he say that was so awful?" He said I was." Amory sobbed again. He called me a liar and a cheat. Oh, Auntie, how could he when I loved him so? I did love him, Auntie, but I can't help it, can I, if I don't love him anymore? Love isn't a thing you can control, is it? I never lied to him, never. It'd be a lie now if I went on pretending. I was wild about Peter. I meant to marry him some day.
But then I met Warren and I just fell out of love with Peter and in love with Warren. And Warren loves me and wants me to marry him, and I said I would. I never dreamed the papers would get a hold of it and print it before I could tell Peter. I tried to tell him I don't see how it's my fault. Do you?
"There's no use in my telling you what I think, Ami," said Aunt Hetty. "But you'd better quit crying or you'll be sick. Come here and sit on my lap." Dinty knew as soon as Peter opened the door that he had seen the paper. When he saw his eyes, he knew he had seen Amory. It was late, and Dinty had spent the last restless hour trying to steady his nerves by answering some of Peter's fan mail. Being a heavy, he had very little of his own. "Well," said Peter, looking at him sullenly, "I suppose you know all about it. I suppose everyone's known all along, but me." Dinty went on calmly reading the letters Peter's secretary had marked personal. "Yes, I know," he said quietly. "But I know, too, that you're going to act like a man and not like a spoiled kid. Get yourself a stiff drink and sit down by the fire." Peter took the drink, but the sight of that open fire turned him sick, and he went to the window. From where he sat, Dinty saw the young shoulders heaving, and yearned over the boy. But he merely went on ripping envelopes. The silence lasted long. Then Peter turned incredibly bright, hard eyes to Dinty. "It isn't that I mind losing her," he lied coldly. "It's the rotten way she did the whole thing. If she's that kind, it's better I lose her now, better than to have married and found out afterwards." But the very thought of marriage with Amory, the thought which he had cherished so close to his heart, was more than he could bear. Back and forth he went, back and forth. Suddenly he caught sight of the paper beneath the blotting pad. With an oath he tore it open, upsetting the ink, scattering the fan letters like white and pink and blue leaves in his path. "Ah, that's it!" He held up the sheet so that the black line, "Amory Allen to wed World Series hero," screamed at them. "That's it! I suppose everybody, even you, will be hiding things from me, watching me to see how I take it, pitying me. Good God, pitying me! Oh, Amory, Amory!" At that, Dinty went to him, steadying him with the touch of his shoulder, with the stern grip of his hand, and with slow, calm words. "There, old boy," he said. "Never mind that. People aren't worth considering, you know. The thing is to face yourself and your own feelings and get hold of yourself." I can't! Dinty, I'm so raw I can't think. I can't see. If she told me, if I'd had any warning, it's knocked me out. Why, only yesterday she was in my arms. She told me she loved me. Only yesterday we were planning our wedding trip. She was to be my wife. If she told me that, said Dinty from the depths of his wisdom, was out of the kindness of her heart, Peter. She didn't want to hurt you. Amory can't bear to hurt anybody. But Peter had gone back to the headline, to the sensational story beneath it of the whirlwind courtship of the greatest southpaw in the world, to the announcement of their approaching marriage. All that while she had been promised to him. "The wedding will take place within a month," he read aloud, and Dinty tightened his grip. "But Peter, maybe it won't," he said.
She may get tired of him, just as she's tired of a lot of men.
No, said Peter. She just told me she was going to marry him, that she really loved him. And I've got to go in that damn studio where everyone knew. Oh, she never made any more attempt to conceal it than I did. She let everybody see my condition all right. Now, I'll be the prize sap of the world. That's the thing I can't stand on top of everything else. On top of everything else. Jilted. Laughed at. The studio joke. The boob. Dinty knew the symptoms. The angry lust for revenge that eats the heart of a man who has suffered as Peter had suffered that day. He could remember when he had locked his own door and thrown the key out the window to keep himself from going to Amory, from strangling the life out of her soft throat. But he did not know Peter, not entirely. He saw the cold, purposeful gleam begin to grow, saw the shame tear stains fade in a fire of anger. Dinty did not know it, but just then Peter looked very much like his mother. "Well, she won't get away with it with me," he said coldly. "Not that part of it, anyway. I won't be made a laughing-stock for the whole industry, nor an object of pity for my friends, not while my name's Peter von Raisdahl. I won't have my scalp hanging at her dressing-room door as an added testimonial that she's worth the $1,000 a week Harriman gives her. She's mashed me up pretty badly, but I'll take that satisfaction away from her. She'll never have a chance to gloat over me. Why, damn it, Dinty, I never asked any other woman in the world to marry me, and she didn't have the decency to tell me when she threw me over. Well, I'll make you a little bet, Dinty. I'll bet you $1,000,000 I'm married before she is." Dinty jumped to him, held up a pleading hand. "Peter, old boy, for God's sake, don't do anything you'll regret all your life. You're half crazy now, with hurt, I know. Who should know if I don't? What does it matter who laughs at you? But you're wrong about Amory. She won't gloat. She'll be sorry for you. Sorry for you." It happened to be just the wrong word. Sorry for me. Sorry for me. Huh! Well, she needn't be sorry for me, your Amory. I'll have a bride of my own before she's one. Dinty went coldly practical. "You insane idiot," he protested. "You can't just go and get married. Do you know what marriage means? How long it lasts?" "I thought I did," said Peter, "but I've learned better. I asked one woman to marry me because I loved her. It didn't go so good." But who are you even thinking of marrying? Who can you ask to marry you that doesn't know you love Amory? You madman!" "What does it matter whom I marry?" Peter's head dropped again wearily. His eyes fell on a square, gray-white envelope at his feet. With hands that shook violently, he caught it up, tore open the pages, read it, laughed. "By heaven," he yelled, "what does it matter now? I think I'll marry the girl who wrote this letter." "Peter," said Dinty, his own face gray and wet, "you are mad, absolutely mad. You can't marry a girl you've never seen, don't know. You can't." "Why can't I?" demanded Peter, and his eyes for a moment did look almost mad, so cold and hot and wild they were. "Better marry a woman you've never seen than some," he swallowed the word, "than some you've held in your arms. Besides, I do know this girl. Not her body, perhaps. I'm not blinded by her beauty, but she's been writing to me for 5 years. Read this, Dinty." Slowly, Dinty read the letter. Phrases of it struck him, even while he struggled for some argument to dissuade the man before him. An unusual letter, a fine letter, interesting, even witty here and there. It was astonishing how many letters of that caliber came in fan mail nowadays. "Why can't I?" Peter flung at him again, pointing at the letter. "Wouldn't you rather marry a girl who could write a letter like that than marry Amory Allen? Wouldn't she understand what marriage means better than Amory Allen? I'll be a husband before she is a wife, and I'm going to marry this girl if she'll have me." He dropped into Dinty's chair at the desk and began to write madly on the telegraph blank he snatched from the drawer. "What," he demanded suddenly, "is her name?" Dinty turned the square, fragrant page. "Her name," he said slowly, "is Anne Bent, and she lives in Georgia." 3. Mrs. Peter Gray did not wait for the chauffeur to open the door of her smart little town car. She flung it open herself with that quick boyish swing of hers, flew up the front steps of the gray shingled bungalow. She had been to a meeting of the entertainment committee for the Children's Hospital, of which she was a chairman, and she was afraid Peter might have reached home before her. It was one of the things she could not bear to have happen. He was at home, and Annie went to him with a little cry of regret. "Pete," she said. She was the only person in the world who ever called him Pete. "I'm sorry to be late, but it's this old benefit for the Children's Hospital. It takes a deal of time, it does. Not that I mind, I like it. Oh, Pete, if you could see some of those poor babies, I I just actually ache about it. Well, anyway, Amory Allen promised to appear, and today she sent word she couldn't make it. I had to get someone to fill in for her." She dropped her severe tailored coat on the floor and flung the smart straw hat on the table. Not a pretty girl exactly. Tall, rather finely built, with a lithe, quick, almost boyish grace, rendered somewhat stately by that crown of dark, smooth hair of hers, a broad, intelligent brow, a brave, humorous mouth. Her brown eyes were set wide apart, interested, eager, gentle eyes. The poise of her head was free, adventurous. A woman full of life and vitality and fun, yet oddly, surprisingly shy and reserved for all that. In Anne Bent there were many avenues marked quite plainly, "No trespassing." She saw his face where he sat in his favorite chair under the reading lamp she had so carefully adjusted for him, and stopped short. "Pete," she said, and he saw again the dawn of light that sometimes came into her eyes for him. "Something's happened, my dear. What is it? Can I help?" Peter Gray shook his head. Because he respected Anne so much, because he felt abashed before the look of her, because he hated himself for the thing he had done to her, Peter tried very hard to smile naturally at her, and to wipe from his face the expression he knew must be there. He failed. "Nothing's wrong, dear," he said. It was characteristic of Anne that when she saw he did not wish to talk, did not care to share his troubles with her, she dropped the thing instantly, patted his shoulder with her light boyish touch, and went on into the kitchen. From there he heard her bright voice, never drawly in spite of its southern accent, in conversation with Chloe, the darky cook she had brought with her from Georgia. Heard her moving about. He could almost see her stirring this, tasting that, putting the finishing touches here, absorbed in the details of cookery, which she loved. 10 minutes later she came back with a cocktail on a small tray. She never drank herself, but she had a positive genius for mixing delicious things for him.
"Come to dinner," she said. "Heavenly soup, a new one. It'll make you feel better spite of yourself." During the first part of dinner, she carried the talk gaily, mixing a salad dressing with her aristocratic hands. She could be very entertaining, this wife of his. But tonight he could not hold his thoughts together, and seeing it, Anne got herself a book, propped it against her water glass, and read contentedly and happily while she ate. She did not sulk nor pout her silence. It was rather as though she herself had chosen it, and enjoyed it equally with him. If there was anything wistful in her frank brown eyes, it was hidden by her drooping lashes. Peter had had many bad times in the 3 months since he and Anne Bent were married. Times when the whole world crushed him in like a hideous monster. Times when sheer physical vertigo took possession of him. He sat opposite her now, while the maid served dinner in the leisurely fashion Anne loved, trying with every ounce of strength in him to beat down this thing, to throw it off, and could not. He had tried always. He had fought as a man fights at death grips, to drive Amory Allen from his thoughts, from his heart, from his very blood. He had battled in the silent watches of the night, and he had fought in the cold light of day, when nightmare is so much more horrible. Ever since he had stood, angry and embarrassed and sick with shame, in the station waiting for the train that was to bring him his bride, and had seen her come toward him, so brave and decent and fine, he had tried with everything in him somehow, some way, to right this horrible mistake. It would have been different, all of it, if Anne had been different, if Anne had been at all the sort of woman you might expect a fan letter bride to be. But she was not. She was just Anne. In the first confused, strange week of their honeymoon, he had learned something of her and of the reasons that she was his bride. Of the terrible loneliness and unhappiness of her home, where she lived with a married sister who, as Anne boyishly put it, thought her a doggone nuisance. He had sensed the spirit of adventure that made her accept the offer in his telegram. He had discovered a family instinct for gambling with life, and could plainly see Anne pitting the chance of great happiness against the chance of complete failure. Sometimes it eased a little, the ache for Amory. Sometimes in trying to make up to his wife for this thing he had done to her, he forgot Amory and her topaz eyes. For he knew, in spite of the tone of fine comradeship she had taken, in spite of her assumption that marriage was only a partnership based on congenial taste and pleasant association, Anne loved him almost as he loved Amory. That, primarily, fundamentally, was the reason she had come to him in answer to that mad telegram. That was the reason she had dared this wild adventure. It had all seemed a little better lately. He was between pictures, and he and Anne played golf every day. Anne played a corking game, better than he himself did, and spring swept the hills of Hollywood, and the country club lay bathed in the scent of new light, the warm, thrilling sun of creation. Anne rose and strolled, with her boyish swing, into the drawing room. A moment later, the soft notes of the piano drifted out to him. Anne played exceedingly well. He rather admired her, too, for spending 2 or 3 hours a day at her practice. So many women nowadays went slack after marriage on a thing like that. But his wife was all energy. He knew that she went for long walks in the hills back of their house, and came in exhausted to curl up in great content with a book in the sun. That she worked for hours in her garden and had a blessed touch with flowers. That she and Chloe united to put up messes of wonderful preserves and jellies, and to invent and arrange new dishes for his delectation. She puttered about, too, busily happy,
raising poultry, arranging flowers. Occasionally he caught her designing a lampshade or a floor pillow. She would never be formal, but his house ran with a carefree ease and delight that surprised him. Too, she tended to all his fan mail herself. She had, he discovered, a strange streak of sentiment about her. Perhaps all that was what gave her that calm, unruffled bearing, so different from the restless dissatisfaction of most women he knew. Not the sort of woman a man relished having cheated, not the sort of wife a man liked to think of having robbed of her birthright. When he thought of what might have come to him as a result of his rash act, his spell of temporary insanity, he recognized it as that now. He was filled with gratitude to see Anne. But gratitude is not love, nor is respect, nor admiration, not even comradeship, and the fact remained that he still loved Amory. Then, this thing today. To be cast opposite Amory Allen again, to be forced to play her lover, maliciously enough her husband, to hold her in his arms, kiss her lips, spend day after day close to her, hearing her voice. He couldn't do it. It wasn't fair. To him, to Anne. It simply couldn't be. He had seen Amory only once since the day he stood at her bedside, a day or two after his marriage, and it had given him a week of absolute hell. Since, he had avoided her as a pestilence, avoided the very mention of her name, the sight of her picture. And with all that, he still loved her, longed for her, found himself dreaming of her, remembering every little word, every kiss. What would happen if he were forced again into her presence? He had gone straight to the casting director, then to the studio manager, then to Harriman himself. They had laughed, argued, asked for reasons, explained. He was under a long-term contract. He was getting a very large salary for a leading man. They could not afford to have him idle. Miss Allen was ready to work, and there was nothing else they could send him into. His thoughts grew a bit wild. But they had him. If he broke his contract, he'd have to give up pictures. More than that, if he did, he branded himself. Everyone would know why he broke his contract. Everyone would know. The story of his marriage to a girl back home. The assumption and rumor that he had perhaps been playing Amory's own game with her, and had always intended to marry this handsome, dark-eyed, aristocratic Southerner. That story would blow up. He was in for it. Nothing soothed the torment of the thought. Even when Dinty and Johnny Clarendon dropped in later for a few rubbers of bridge, Anne was an excellent player, and the four spent a couple of evenings a week over the card table. He could not keep his mind on the cards. Anne, in her brusque, kindly way, caught him in a stupid revoke, and broke up the game with easy laughter. "That'll be all," she said. "Pete's got to go to bed." She did not know what she was fighting. Peter Gray's wife. No one had ever told her of Amory Allen, but she sensed the foe in the dark, and met it with her best of courage, and kindness, and good cheer, the only weapons she had ever known. When the day came to start the picture, Peter Gray went down very early. He wanted to be on the set when she came. It would be easier. He was trembling like a raw colt. His hands were hot, his mouth dry. He was in evening clothes, and Anne, when she kissed him her cold goodbye, thought she had never seen him look so handsome. It was a drawing-room set, very stunning, very elaborate. When she came, Amory Allen wore a thing of soft clinging laces, a thing that suggested and lured but never revealed. Her hair was cut about her head with golden ribbons, never quite beautiful, yet never needing to be, all the famous potent charm uppermost. She lit a cigarette and dropped into her own canvas chair. Her greeting was friendly, good-natured. Peter stood there, waiting patiently for the waters of agony to close over him, waiting for the dizzy, maddening sense to begin, all the aching hurt. They hadn't been on the set half an hour until her history was brought up to date for him. The famous picture had gone the way of all flesh. It was a certain wealthy young businessman now, handsome and rather brutal. Amory, it was declared, was quite mad about him. Suddenly, like the flash of a poisoned dagger, a hideous thought tore through Peter Gray's mind. Oh, in a space that could easily be counted in days, this lovely, fragile thing had been in the arms of 4 men that he knew of, kissed, loved by 4 different men. Too fond, too craving of devotion, common. He caught himself with a jerk. Sacrilege, treason, such thought! But he could not hold it. Too easy, too sweet, like opium, drugging with mere dreams and visions and leaving always that strange, unsatisfied, clamorous awakening. If a man grew tired of kissing her, what then? Too free with the bait of herself, the director called to him. Take her in your arms, Peter. Kiss her. Show her how much you love her. You've got to bring out the contrast between the husband's devotion to her and her easy acceptance of it. Peter shuddered, put out his arms, caught again that old wonderful fragrance, that armful of loveliness. But the bomb never exploded. He opened his eyes. She was in his arms, Amory. She was looking up at him with her topaz eyes melting, but it meant absolutely nothing to him. He was holding a beautiful, alluring young motion picture star, a rather common, good-natured, big-hearted, selfish young creature. That was all. She had never been his Amory. It seemed to him that he would never get home that afternoon. It was twilight, a time of fascinating shadows and brilliant lights. He called riotously for Anne, and heard a faint answer and the barking of dogs from behind the garage. He dashed out through the garden, her garden, alive and fragrant with the breath of orange blossoms, of narcissus and lilacs, flaunting gaily the purple and white of flags in the flame of marigolds. She was putting the baby chicks to bed, the 3 dogs shoving about her. There were 9 baby ones, born only the day before, buttoned in a big gingham apron. Anne was busy getting the foolish, fluffy things into their box with the mother hen. "Hi, Pete," she said from the ground. "Aren't they adorable? I never saw such things in my whole life. I'm going to raise the lot of them. I'm glad we bought this place. Maybe the house isn't as elegant as some trick ones, but I do love this yard." He said nothing, smiling down at her on her knees in the dirt. He had never dreamed of this thing she was doing to him with her sweetness and devotion, her simplicity and frankness, healing him. Looking up, she met his eyes and went rather white. He dropped down on the ground beside her, locked one arm around her. She dropped her head on his shoulder. They stayed so silently for a long time while the shadows deepened. "Anne," said Peter Gray at last, "I can never tell you how glad I am that I love you. I think you'll make a man of me yet." 4. But never, even after the babies came, could Peter Gray stand the sight nor the fragrance of an open fire. For a man may give up his dreams and replace them with 1,000 finer realities, but you must not remind him of the time when he thought they had come true. End of The Fan Letter Bride by Adela Rogers St. Johns.